In the summer of 2001, 40-year-old Lucia de Berk was working at the Juliana Children's Hospital in The Hague, Netherlands. She was a registered nurse whose job it was to care for patients in intensive care. Soon, her life would spiral downwards at breakneck speed, and instead of being in a hospital, Lucia would find herself in the dock, accused of multiple deaths. And the de Berk case would become one of the most high-profile and controversial in the history of Holland. On September 4, 2001, a baby girl named Amber died in the intensive care unit of the Children's Hospital. It was during de Berk's shift, and she was nearby when she died. Her colleagues became suspicious, as this was an unexpected turn of events, as the patient's condition had not previously caused concern for his life. This outcome led people to think about possible unnatural circumstances. When they shared their suspicions with the hospital management, an internal investigation was ordered, which revealed that similar incidents had occurred during Lucia's shifts before. Between September 2000 and September 2001, she attended 9 cases of infant deaths or emergency resuscitation. Based on this investigation, Juliana Children's Hospital contacted the police. 3 other hospitals where de Berk had worked for many years decided to investigate themselves and found 30 suspicious deaths that were initially ruled out as natural. Apparently, the materials provided by the hospitals were so convincing that Lucia de Berk was immediately arrested. On the advice of the lawyer provided, she refused to testify, stating only her innocence. The woman was immediately fired from the hospital, turning a blind eye to the positive character reference and the results of the assessment de Berk had passed just a few days before the child's death. According to these documents, the nurse had performed her duties conscientiously, was competent and had no previous penalties. The Children's Hospital management made a mathematical calculation, according to which it turned out that the probability that Lucia de Berk was accidentally nearby during the incidents with patients was 1 in 342 million. With this data in hand, the Dutch police found it difficult to resist the temptation to conduct the investigation with bias towards the suspect. It must be said that they did not resist. De Berk's mother and sister would later say that they immediately sensed the detectives' mood to look only for what would support the prosecution's version of events. For example, the investigation was extremely interested in an incident that happened to the family in the early 70s, and, it would seem, has nothing to do with the present day. Then the de Berk family's house, who were still living in Canada, burned down. After conducting an examination, the fire department believed that the cause was a banal short circuit, that is, an accident. In 2001, Dutch law enforcement agencies intended to prove that it was arson, which Lucia set. By the way, she was not at home at the time of the fire. The detectives flew to Canada, where after so many years, of course, they could not find evidence of their theory. Something had to be done about this. Then the police turned to an American expert specializing in maniac cases, by the name of Brantley. He provided his conclusion, from which it followed that such an incident as a fire could be an indirect sign testifying in favor of de Berk's guilt in a series of murders. For reference, pyromania or a morbid craving for arson is indeed one of the 3 main behavioral characteristics indicating a potential killer, according to the MacDonald Triad, formulated in 1963. Dr. MacDonald, who examined a group of patients who threatened to kill others, concluded that the vast majority of them had 3 identical signs in their anamnesis: pyromania, animal cruelty, and bedwetting. Nowadays, it is believed that MacDonald's experiment was flawed due to the small number of people studied, but it is recognized that most serial killers do have the problems formulated by the doctor. By that time, Lucia de Berk had been released from custody on her own recognizance. But the police weren't going to give in so easily. Hoping to obtain incriminating information, they began tapping the phone in the suspect's home, and one day in December, their efforts seemed to bear fruit. Lucia was then caring for her sick grandfather, who was very weak due to his advanced age. Discussing his condition on the phone, de Berk mentioned to her interlocutor that she was wondering, "How can I end this?" The police considered these words to be an intention to kill her grandfather, so Lucia was immediately arrested. The trial of the former nurse began in March 2003. Without any physical evidence, the prosecution was determined to prove that between 1997 and 2001, de Burke deliberately poisoned 9 patients with digoxin, a heart drug. Some of them died, while the others suffered a significant deterioration. One patient was the infant whose death had started it all, while the others were elderly people from Lucia's previous places of work. An expert on behalf of the prosecution testified that after reviewing the patient's medical records, he was inclined to believe that their sudden deaths from cardiac arrest were caused by the administration of digoxin in excess of the therapeutic dose. However, no exhumation of the bodies was performed to confirm this theory. Another argument was Lucia's personal diary, discovered during a search of her home. The prosecutor considered some of the entries to be evidence of a veiled admission of guilt. For example, on the night of the death of one patient, an elderly woman with terminal cancer, de Burke wrote that she gave in to her desire. She also mentioned several times that she had one big secret. In her final statement, the defendant explained that the diary was simply about her love for tarot cards. While on duty at night at the bedside of seriously ill patients, she often made layouts, trying to predict the outcome of her patient's illness. She could not share her conclusions with her colleagues, since the pragmatic medical community would simply laugh at her, which is why Lucia called her occupation a big secret. In addition, she understood that such layouts were not entirely ethical in relation to patients, and promised herself not to do this anymore, but periodically gained into her desire. In fact, the third and final argument of the prosecution was the very same calculation of the probability of a nurse's accidental presence during deaths, which recognized such a probability as negligible. Based on this evidence, de Burke was eventually sentenced to life imprisonment for the murders of 4 patients and the attempted murder of 3 more. In her appeal in 2004, de Burke still insists on her innocence, but during the trial, 3 more episodes are attached to her case. The verdict of the court in The Hague is life imprisonment without the possibility of parole and compulsory psychiatric treatment. Later, the Psychological Monitoring Department of Prisoners at Scheveningen Prison, where the woman was serving her sentence, would conclude that it found no signs of mental illness requiring treatment. The case was brought back into the spotlight in 2006, when Professor Ton Dirksen and his sister, Dr. Mette de Nooy, presented a report with their findings that literally blew the court's conclusions to smithereens. Dirksen and de Nooy claimed that a serious error had been made in calculating the impossibility of a random coincidence, the one where the probability was estimated at 1 in 342 million, and that in fact such a probability was 1 in 44. Richard Gill, a professor of mathematical statistics at Leiden University, used a more complex formula and came up with a figure of 1 in 9. That is, every 9th nurse in the country could find herself in such a situation. Dirksen and de Nooy also dispute the medical aspect of the guilty verdict. According to them, the substance found in the victims could well have been produced by their own bodies. The findings of Professor Dirksen and Dr. de Nooy were supported by other prominent Dutch scientists, including Nobel laureate Gerard Hooft. Under public pressure, Lucia de Burke's case was referred to the Supreme Court for a new trial. In early 2009, in preparation for the new trial, the court commissioned toxicologist Jan Molenbelt to conduct a detailed investigation into the death of the first child, as well as the 2 other children for whose deaths de Burke was blamed. There was more documentation and evidence available on these cases, so it was decided to rely on them when making a decision. In December 2009, Dr. Molenbelt presented his report, which completely refuted the experts' initial findings of digoxin poisoning. The toxicologist insisted that all deaths incriminated to de Burke were due to natural causes. In the course of a full-scale investigation, Molenbelt also uncovered a significant number of diagnostic and treatment errors committed by the staff of the Juliana Children's Hospital. On April 14, 2010, Lucia de Burke was fully acquitted. The Ministry of Justice paid her an undisclosed amount of compensation for unlawful prosecution. After her release, the woman gave many interviews about what happened to her. "I want to warn people, especially nurses, what happened to me can happen to you," she says. After all the misadventures, de Burke left her profession. Although she admits that she misses her job, she says that she can no longer do it, neither mentally nor physically. Instead, she gives lectures throughout the country and often appears on various talk shows, telling her story. The Juliana Children's Hospital, which actually organized the problems of its nurse, later paid her compensation in the amount of €45,000. In April 2014, a film about the story of Lucia de Berk was released in Dutch cinemas. As the end credits read, no hospital staff or representatives of the Ministry of Justice have been held accountable for their involvement in this case.